Hey folks, Regis here, and no video this time around because I'm at BlizzCon right now, but we got to talk about the new expansion, Descent of Dragons. Tons of new cards revealed. By the way, I was one word off when predicting this expansion name, which is completely bonkers. So up first here, let's talk about Galakrond the Nightmare, the rogue version of Galakrond. There's going to be one of these for each of the 5 evil classes, and there's a lot here that goes into how Galakrond works exactly. So as you'll see, it's a hero card, which means it's going to function just like a hero card. You'll get a new hero power when you play it. You'll also get a battle cry here that is upgradable. So the first version of Galakrond will draw you 1 card. If you upgrade that using the invoke keyword, which other cards, both in the neutral and rogue set, will have, then you'll draw 2 cards. If you upgrade it one more time, you go to the final form of Galakrond, which will draw you 4 cards, all of which are still going to cost 0, by the way, in each form. They're all going to cost 0, which is insane. And you're also going to equip a 5/2 claw. So you not only get this ridiculous like Togwaggle treasure reward, but you also get a weapon that can impact the board immediately, all for 7 mana, which is bonkers, by the way. Now, invoke is a keyword. How that's going to work is certain cards are going to be in your deck to support Galakrond to both upgrade it, but also anytime you play a card with the keyword invoke, it's also going to invoke the hero power of Galakrond, activating that hero power. Even if you don't have Galakrond played yet, the card's still going to give you the hero power reward. In Rogue's case, that's going to add a random lackey to your hand. So once you play Galakrond, you can spend 2 mana to get a random lackey, or you can play any Invoke card, and it's also just going to give you a lackey. So Invoke kind of does 2 things. It pulls that hero power into action, but also upgrades your Galakrond to its final form, all of which means you're going to get a super high synergy package when you run a version of Galakrond and supporting invoke cards. Now when it comes to rogue, this is ridiculously strong. Drawing 4 cards for 7 mana is already a real card in Hearthstone called Sprint. When they cost 0, it's even better, and a weapon added on is great, and a hero power that generates you a lackey, you know what? That's not too bad either. So as long as the sort of supporting invoke cards are solid for rogue, this card just makes way too much sense, and we'll almost certainly see some kind of play. So now let's move on to Seal Fate here. This is actually one of the invoke cards for Rogue. This is 3 mana, deals 3 damage to an undamaged character. So kind of like an expensive backstab or, you know, altered Shadow Strike, if you think about it that way. But it also invokes Galakrond, so keep in mind that's going to add a random lackey to your hand, assuming you have the Rogue Galakrond. Theoretically, it's possible to have other Galakronds and Seal Fate in your deck, but that's shenanigans for a later discussion. But dealing 3 damage and getting a lackey is probably pretty solid for 3 mana. I think this still remains a nice little early tempo play to help you generate some resources, upgrade your Galakrond for that super powerful play later. So I think Seal Fate looks solid, if not, you know, outstanding necessarily. So now let's move on here to another legendary. This is one of the legendary dragons, non-Galakrond. For Druid, it's Ysera Unleashed. It's a 9 mana 4/12, and the battle cry will shuffle 7 dream portals into your deck, and when drawn, those will summon a random dragon. So another portal style card, but this time instead of some 2/2s with rush or some spiders, we're going to get dragons. And dragons can be big and dragons can be small. On average, they're probably on the bigger side of things, so potentially some big payoffs there. But unfortunately for Ysera, I think she's just too slow at 9 mana because she's just a 4/12. She doesn't do anything immediately, right? It's probably going to be hard to force a draw the same turn you play Ysera. Even if you do, you may not get your dragons right away, and then that means it might take, you know, 3 or 4 turns for these dragons to start being realized. And I think that's just going to take a little bit too long. I think Druid can just win faster and more decisively, play more stats onto the board immediately right now, based on how we see Druid. And I don't see how Ysera disrupts that all that much. If perhaps, you know, there's a super late game, very rampy style Druid that utilizes dragon synergies, maybe Ysera will make sense in that world, but I still feel like she's going to be a pretty slow onboard play with a very delayed payoff, which traditionally in Hearthstone is not the sort of thing that succeeds well. Even the faster, you know, rush portal stuff we've seen now, even though those are 2/2s, even those cards feel too slow right now. So for me, Ysera, you know, if she were cheaper, I think this could work, but as she stands, feels just a tad too weak. So now let's move on to Lightning Breath for Shaman. This is a 3 mana spell that deals 4 damage to a minion, so kind of a Shadow Bolt at its base. But if you're holding a dragon, you also damage that minion's neighbors. So it's a power shot that's been doubled essentially to deal 4, which is a very powerful potential early game swing. That's going to remove a lot of stuff on turn 3, and it'll even serve nicely in a pinch later in the game too to flex into a turn. So as long as you have a dragon in your deck, this card's power level is off the charts. Super, super strong option. Way better than Lightning Storm in most cases, and it doesn't overload you, so pretty much the perfect early game semi-wide board and semi-tall board removal. It's kind of in that perfect niche slot between the two. It's, good at those turn 3 and turn 4 boards. Sort of perfect to answer even those Desert Hare Evolve style turns in some ways too, although of course this is Shaman, so who knows. But I think this card's power level's there. It just has to have dragon support, which seems like in this expansion is going to work nicely, so there's a lot of potential for this one. Moving on to the Shield of Galakrond. This is a 5-mana 4/5 with Taunt, and the battlecry invokes Galakrond. So we've got ourselves pretty solid base body here, slightly overcosted Taunt, but remember, with Invoke Galakrond, you're going to get some bonus effect. In the case of Rogue, you would get a Lackey added to your hand. Other classes are going to have other payoffs, but needless to say, this seems like a very good building block, for a more control style Galakrond deck across the various classes, which means somebody's going to find to make this thing work. Like, it's just too safe, too consistent, too reliable to not run, so there's going to be a deck that finds room for this. Moving on to Learn Draconic, this is a mage spell here. It's a side quest, which is a new style of quest, much smaller, more easy to complete. Also, you can play it simultaneously to your normal quest, so no exclusivity problems here. But on this one, if you spend 8 mana on spells, you'll get a 6/6 dragon summoned basically for free, or for 1 mana, which is really, really nice. Doesn't have to be run in a quest deck, right? So you can just use this as a free kind of 1 mana option, and then 8 mana for spells on mage is really not tough. Like turn 4 or 5, there's a decent chance you're going to get yourself a free 6/6 in play. That's really, really good. Now, your opponent does kind of have some way to understand when it's going to happen or kind of predict it, but nonetheless, it's just a lot of stats for this cost without much risk or downside. So this card looks really strong to me. So next up here we have Sathravar. This is the reward card for virtual tickets. It's a 9-mana 5/5 demon neutral card that will choose a friendly minion on the battle cry and then add a copy of it to your hand, deck, and battlefield. So kind of like a super Zola the Gorgon, but unfortunately at 9 mana, so much slower and more awkward. How are you ever going to get a minion in play that you can play at the same time as Sathravar, right? Anything that's super valuable or awesome, your opponent's going to kill it before you have the mana or time to play Sathravar. So outside of Shirvala or super cost discounted style cards, it never makes sense. And then even with Shirvala, Baleful Banker does that job better, right? So I just don't see how this one makes sense in a competitive standpoint. Maybe there's some crazy OTK deck that can solve all those math problems, but in the most part, I think this card's going to fall short again because it's just too slow. It's going to be super fun, super cool. We'll try to experiment with it, but from a power level standpoint, I think this one's weak. So finally here, I saved this one for last because it is obscene. It is Breath of Dreams for Druid. It's a 2-mana spell that draws you a card, but also if you're holding a dragon, you gain an empty mana crystal. So it's a better Wild Growth. And Wild Growth was so good that it got nerfed. I think this card's power level is off the charts. It is so strong. Now, it will be a little bit limited because it can only be played in dragon decks, so there is a conditionality there and a limit to its power level, but I think that some deck will find a reason to run this. Some dragon deck out there for Druid will make sense, and this card will certainly be an important part of that deck. So this one's like a sure thing in some ways. I don't think it's actually a 5-star card because technically it's a little bit too limited in its scope, but it's as good as 4-star cards you're going to get because the power level is just bonkers. Okay, I lied. We have so many more cards to look at. So many have been revealed, including a Hunter Legendary Dragon Bane. It's a 4-mana 3/5 mech. After you use your hero power, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. So trading Hunter's hero power for some board presence if this thing's on board. So that's like a 6 mana. It can't hit face too, which is kind of nuts if you think about it. If they only have their face, that could really ramp up the damage of a hero power, which seems quite powerful. That's pretty spooky, honestly. So I think because that could potentially pump out so much damage that this card has a chance to see some play. Certainly, it's not the stickiest stats or the craziest on-board presence, but because it can swing things so hard and maybe pump out lots and lots of face damage if you clear the board, then Dragon Bane certainly has a shot. We do have the Dragonblight Cultist here, but without knowing Galakrond's hero power and what the invoke style effect does, I don't feel comfortable reviewing this one just yet. We need more information to understand what this does before we can really say much, but I thought I'd include it so you could at least take a look at it. Next up here, we have the Dwarven Sharpshooter, a 1-mana 1/3 that reads your hero power can target minions. And that's pretty crazy. 1-mana 1/3s we know are great stat lines to open up games. And Hunter's hero power being able to target minions makes that a really powerful turn 2 tempo play as well, being able to remove something from your opponent while you also start to stabilize the board with your own stuff. So this minion looks fantastic. Great option for a 1-drop. Even though it's not a beast, I think it's still got a lot of potential to see play. Moving on to the Emerald Explorer, new Druid Dragon, 6-mana 4/8 with Taunt. So putting a nice Taunt Dragon in the pool there for Ysera. Also, it will discover a dragon on its battle cry. And I mean, a 6-mana 4/8 is a pretty solid Taunt body. Like, I think that's something you can absolutely afford to hit on board. And then discovering another dragon means it's got some value upside as well. This card looks surprisingly good to me. Stabilizing the board, something Druid loves to do, and generating resources is always nice too. So the Emerald Explorer looks really rather strong. We also have the Evasive Draconid here, 7-mana 7/7 with Taunt, and can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So, I mean, this is a cool kind of thing to exist in Evolve pools, but I don't think it's good enough to ever make the cut in a constructed style deck. It's really just something that's good to exist. Interesting arena card, right? But I think there are still better taunt options and better big late game body options than Evasive Draconid can offer. The Phase Stalker for Hunter is a 2-mana 2/3 beast. Doesn't exactly look like a beast, maybe some kind of lizard. And it reads, after you use your hero power, cast a secret from your deck. So more hero power synergies for Hunter, which is pretty sweet. And as we know, getting a secret for free can be pretty powerful. I do think that makes Phase Stalker a little bit of an awkward mana play in some cases, because you don't necessarily want to use your hero power on turn 3 after following up on the Phase Stalker. So this starts to feel like a 4 or more kind of mana turn, which 2/3s are certainly less impactful at those points. It doesn't fit that kind of smooth mass contender style play, but it has also long-term upside. If you can keep it alive for a bit, you can get multiple secrets pulled from your deck. So because the effect is strong, because it's a beast, there are some things here that line up for Hunter. So I do have some hopes for this card to work, even if I don't think it's kind of perfect from a mana lineup standpoint. Next up here, we have Praise Galakrond for Rogue, another invoke card for Galakrond. This will give a minion +1 attack, which frankly isn't much, but it is a really cheap cycle and way to turn into a lackey, because that's going to be the invoke Galakrond effect for Rogue, right? It will become a lackey in hand, or add a lackey to your hand. So suddenly it's kind of doing something for 1 mana, and the +1 attack just feels like a little bonus. And as we know, cheap spells for Rogue are good for things like setting up combos. So sure, I think a Galakrond Rogue deck would run this. The 1 attack probably won't go far, but just because it's a cheap upgrade to your Galakrond and turns into more combo activations, this card makes a little bit of sense to me. Next up here, we have the Twin Tyrant, an 8-mana 4/10 dragon. The battle cry on this one reads, deal 4 damage to 2 random enemy minions. So another big dragon to kind of put in the pool for things like Ysera, I guess, and just to have options for dragons in your hand. Now, with this not having taunt or any sort of defensive play, I think it's just going to be a little bit too risky. 4 damage to random enemy minions could clear some boards rather nicely, but by turn 8, things are often going to be bigger than that. So I think this will feel more awkward than useful in a lot of cases, and probably won't make the cut in constructed, although certainly powerful perhaps in other forms of play. Moving on here to the Umbral Skulker for Rogue, 4-mana 3/3. Battlecry, if you've invoked twice, add 3 coins to your hand, and that certainly makes all these other invoke cards look insane. The Umbral Skulker, ridiculous. 3 coins is nice. That really kind of makes this a 1-mana 3/3 at its base, but of course coins can really scale in their utility pretty ridiculously for Rogue. Perhaps there's Gadget Zan Auctioneer stuff on the horizon, or maybe just crazy Edwin-style turns. So absolutely in a Galakrond Rogue deck, this looks like a no-brainer. Next up here, we have the Veiled Worshipper for Warlock. It's a 4-mana 5/4, so interesting vanilla stat line there. And the battle cry reads, if you've invoked twice, you can draw 3 cards. And 4-mana 5/4 that draws 3 cards is obviously ridiculous. So a Galakrond Warlock deck would clearly include something like this, because you're not sacrificing anything on board and you're refilling your hand to an absurd degree. The power level on this card is just super high.